moving on to our third element of pricing power today, which is price discrimination. So, discrimination is usually a word that means a bad thing. In this case, it actually has a lot of positive elements to it. So we're going to talk about what's going on here. So, price discrimination is one way in which the deadweight loss that we have in a pricing power model can actually be eliminated. We can get rid of the inefficiency and get ourselves to that efficient quantity. However, this might not necessarily be to the consumer's benefit, or at least some consumers. Some consumers are going to benefit from price discrimination, and some are not. So efficiency is, remember, from society's point of view, not the consumer. So what's going to happen with price? What is price discrimination? What's going to happen? So price discrimination is when you have the ability to charge different people different prices. That's the idea here. What's going on with this, right? So first of all, why would we expect this to, not just be different, but also improve things like efficiency? So, the demand curve represents the marginal benefit of what somebody gets from the good. It also represents the most they are willing to pay for it, right? If somebody gets $10 of value out of something, they'd rather pay $9 than $10. But if you charged them $10, they'd be like, yeah, okay. So the most profit that you could possibly make out of something would be if you could somehow see into their brain and know exactly what they're willing to pay, and then charge each individual person their particular willingness to pay. So I telepathically read your brain, and I know that you're willing to pay $20, so I charge you $20. You're willing to pay 21, so I charge you 21. You're only willing to pay 16, so I charge you 16, and so on, right? Now, if I do that, I'm going to extract as much of the surplus out of this market as I can. It's all going to be for me, right? As opposed to if I have to set a single price for everybody. So let's say I know, even if I can read your mind, I say, okay, 20, 21, 16, and so on. I'm going to charge a price of 12. That's my profit maximizing price. Well, in that case, I've lost out on some of the money you would have been willing to give me, but didn't have to because I charged a lower price in the interest of getting other people into the market as well. So that's sort of the idea here, right? The idea is to charge people as close to what they're willing to pay as possible. However, we cannot see into people's brains. We are not telepathic. So how is it possible this works in the real world? Well, there's a bunch of ways in which this works in the real world. It's implemented. This is done through coupons. It's done through things that are called hurdles, or discounts, or requirements for special deals, or just straight up charging different people different prices. One example of this is senior pricing. If you remember movie theaters, if you ever go to a movie theater, you notice that they have a special price for seniors and also sometimes for students. Why would they do this? Right. So, as an economist, you always want to ask, what are the incentives behind this, right? What are the incentives that might lead them to do this, as opposed to not doing it? So let's take a look at the costs and deadweight loss without price discrimination. Oh, weird. So why might they do this? So seniors and students often have lower willingness to pay. Often they have lower incomes, right? Students in general have lower incomes than the general population. This is less true than it used to be, but seniors often also have less income than the general population. So if you could see into their brains and think, what are you willing to pay for a movie ticket? It would probably be lower for seniors and students than it would be for the general population. So what am I going to do? How am I going to set my price? Well, either, let's just assume that everyone's the same. General population is willing to pay $15. Students and seniors willing to pay 12, just for simplicity. Right? What price am I going to set? Well, let's say I set a price of 12. Now everybody's willing to buy a ticket, but I'm missing out on $3 that I could have made by selling for 15 to all the general population, right? So everyone gets a ticket, but I'm missing out on some money I could have had. Or I could set a price of 15. If I do that, then I'm selling for as much as possible to the general population, but nobody in the seniors or students is willing to buy a ticket. Well, what if I set a price in the middle? Well, if I set a price in the middle, then seniors and students are still not willing to buy a ticket, and I'm not charging as much as I could. So however I do it, I'm either excluding people who would be willing to buy from me by setting the price too high, or I'm missing out on some additional surplus I could have extracted by setting the price too low. But what senior discounts allow me to do is allow me to charge different prices to different groups. I can charge $12 to the seniors and students and $15 to the general population, which allows me to charge everybody the absolute maximum they are willing to pay. And so I both sell to everybody and make as much money as I can. Now, the interesting thing is that this is actually good for efficiency. It improves the efficiency of the market to be able to do this. Why is this? Well, imagine we got to set one price, right? Here's us setting the price of, let's say, 15, right? Where the general population who's up here has the higher willingness to pay, they all buy a ticket, but the seniors and students are left out, right? I've determined that my profit maximizing price, if I can only set one price, is to sell to the general population and cut everybody else out. And now you might think, well, why don't I just sell to everybody else too? Well, it's not in my interest. If I lower the price to 12 where it needs to be for everyone to buy a ticket, then yeah, I'll sell to everybody, but I'm going to lose out on the $3 extra that I could have charged everybody else. Right? So I choose, as the profit maximizer, not to sell to these people, have a lower quantity at a higher price. Right? That's my profit maximizing point. But it's inefficient. I could easily provide a ticket to those people at what they're willing to pay and above my marginal cost, but I choose not to because it would require me to lower the price to everybody else. So what price discrimination allows me to do is both lower the price for that group, but also keep the price high for everybody else. So it now becomes in my interest to broaden my market because I can now broaden my market without having to lower everybody else's prices. I can just lower prices on the people who are not willing to pay the higher price. So now I'm going to set two prices. I'm going to set one price up here for the general population. I'm going to set a second price down here for the seniors and students. Now I can sell to everybody, right? And it's in my interest to sell to everybody because if somebody's willing to pay above my marginal cost, then I can just charge them whatever that amount is. Now you'll notice that the deadweight loss went away because my quantity increased. My quantity went from this, the same monopoly quantity we got over there. But under price discrimination, it's now in my interest to sell all the units it is efficient to sell. You'll also notice that some things changed about the consumer surplus and profit boxes, right? Profit got bigger, right? It used to be this sort of square. We lost a little bit of area over here, but really we gained a lot over here as well, right? So the profit's gotten bigger. Consumer surplus has gotten smaller in some ways, but also bigger in others. So these people over here, they're paying more for their ticket now under price discrimination, so they lost out. These people over here, they were not able to afford a ticket before, but now they can at a lower price, right? So for some people, specifically the people on the lower end of the marginal benefit spectrum here, they get a good deal under price discrimination. These people get a bad deal. They would rather have the lower marginal benefit people in the market driving the price down on average, right? But they don't get that. Which has some interesting distributional implications, because if you think about where different people are on this curve, richer people are often up here, people with less money are down here. So price discrimination is one of the few forms of discrimination that works out better for people with less. Here's another example of price discrimination, textbooks. So here is a textbook that I own. It's on my shelf. I bought it when I was a grad student. Here's the exact same textbook that you can find on Amazon. This book cost me 20 bucks. This book costs 40 bucks. Why are those two things different? Right? How is it possible that they're able to charge different amounts for this exact same book? And you might think, well, obviously, this one's in Chinese. But actually, no, it's not in Chinese. It's in English. It's just the cover that is in Chinese. So this is what's called an international edition of the textbook that is sold only in China. There are, of course, not just China, but there are many different countries and languages, whatever they have in the title, where it's the exact same book, but they only market it in one country. Now, the idea here is that they know that the marginal benefit, as in the willingness to pay, is much higher in the United States than it is in China. Incomes are just generally higher in the United States. We have more money to spend, so we are willing to spend more money on textbooks. So their profit maximizing, the way they could maximize profit is if they could find a way to charge more in the United States than they can in China. Again, so it goes back to the same example with the senior discounts, right? If they could only charge one price across the whole world, what would they choose to do? They'd either have to set the price too high to sell in China, or set the price too low to get all the profit that they could get from the United States. This is, of course, known as regionalization, selling the same good or very nearly the same good in different countries at different prices. And the profit maximizing way to do this is to charge basically the countries that are willing to pay more, and the countries that are willing to pay less. This is done, for example, with DVDs. It used to be done with DVDs when people bought DVDs. Video games, for example, are much more expensive in Australia than they are here. By the way, if you're curious about where to get books like this, abebooks.com is a source of international editions you can buy. They're often considerably cheaper than buying the regular version. I haven't been there in a while. I assume they still do that. All right. So they charge US students higher textbook price. And again, you can imagine how this shakes out for different groups. Obviously, this is not so nice for the United States students who are expected to pay the higher price because they're in the higher marginal value area. But it does mean that it is now in the textbook publisher's interest to also sell to other parts of the world. You can imagine how this might work out really well with stuff like medicine, right? How do you get an expensive, how do you get somebody to sell medicine to an area that does not have a lot of money? Well, if you have to charge one price for the entire world, then it's probably going to be they're going to decide not to do that. They're going to decide to set the price above what people in a poor country can pay. And then that poor country is not going to be able to buy the medicine really at all. But if they can set two different prices, yes, the rich country ends up paying more, but also the poor country is able to buy it at all. That's the exact same thing that's happening here, right? Poor country can't afford the medicine, but now they can't because the company is able to charge them a lower price, two separate prices. You could argue the ethics of that maybe they should sell to them anyway, but low prices in the expensive country and also low prices elsewhere. But that's, I mean, you could enforce that in some way, but then you have to ask, well, what's the incentive to make the medicine in the first place? And this is all about how you get people to do stuff, right? How do you get them to develop the medicine and also provide it out everywhere? And it's a complex question, and it's hard.